Does it help Tennessee for Alabama or Georgia to win the SEC championship, or does it matter? Your thoughts. Who will you be rooting for? And don't say anybody. If you have to choose one person to win, who is it on the message board? Is it Georgia or is it Alabama? So that's the question I have for you. And as far as the move back to Knoxville, funny enough, we're headed to Knoxville to evaluate some properties today, and we'll pick something, and then we'll give my man Andy Mason a call. So thanks for asking on the message board. So Caleb, who should Tennessee root for? Georgia or Alabama?
I think this is a rare one where it doesn't matter because both are going to be, I think both are going to be absolutely dominant on the recruiting trail for the next like 3 to 4 years anyway. And Alabama, just because they have Nick Saban, and now Georgia. Look, these aren't like a coach with one national title. These are two established, full-on established programs at this point. There's nothing you can do to break them from being established. And a loss in this game isn't going to change the fact that these two are full-on established. I mean, I guess maybe. Okay, you know what? Okay, I'll root for Georgia on the off chance, and I think it's a real off chance. But root for Georgia on the off chance that maybe if Alabama loses, the narrative gets out there that Nick Saban has done, and that affects recruiting against Alabama.
No, gosh, I was going to be original, and you stole my thought. All right, so perfect scenario. Here it is. Here's the perfect scenario, and I've seen it play out in person, so it can happen. Don't think that it won't. Brought to you by Hemp House, the premier hemp dispensary online with a wide variety of great selection and strict standards to ensure you only receive the best in CBD or Delta products. Go to hemphousechat2ts.com. Use the promo code HOOKED. That's HOOKED. hemphousechat2ts.com. Use the promo code HOOKED. Perfect scenario. Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, 2 years back-to-back. Help me with the years. They played in the SEC championship. Urban Meyer had this guy named Tim Tebow that led them to a win in the first game, the first SEC championship game that I covered. The second one, things were a little bit different. Nick Saban decided it was time for Urban Meyer to take a little bit of a spanking. So he didn't just take a spanking. Alabama gave out a thorough whipping. And Urban Meyer said to himself, oh, man, I feel something in my chest. It could be a heart attack or it could just be a panic attack. So I'm done coaching. That could happen with Georgia and Nick Saban. We all ask the question, Nick Saban, what will prompt him to retire? And I don't know. I'm just offering this up. Nick Saban dominates the SEC in recruiting almost as high a level as he once did. I know that Georgia gets 3 or 4 prospects that they're both in on every year, and I get that. Kirby Smart is in another league. But what if Nick Saban comes away from that game and says to himself, I'm still a B+ on talent, maybe even an A. Georgia's an A+, and they're close to Atlanta, and I don't think I can overcome that. I think that's what Tennessee wants, despite the fact that they're in the East. There's not going to be an East anymore. But despite the fact that they are a recruiting rival, I think you want Kirby Smart to beat Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide into submission, into the point of saying, to hell with this. I've had enough. I've had a great career, maybe the best career of all time. It's time to spend time on the lake. I think that's the best scenario. Now, you tell me the best scenario that could play out for Tennessee fans.
Okay, 2 things I want to ask you about this on that, because you covered that Florida-Alabama game, right? The one Tim Tebow's last SEC year, right?
Yeah, I knew afterwards. John Adams and I were sitting together, and John looked at me and said, something's wrong with that man. This was before any of the anxiety attack or with the stuff that happened at his house or the esophageal spasms, and he looked wrong. I mean, the guy, I had a coach call me. He said, don't be surprised if that's it for Urban Meyer at Florida. He looked like a beaten man.
Well, and you were knee deep covering recruiting at that time, right? And we were all I was just a fan watching college football. We were all well versed on Florida's internal issues, weren't we? We all knew what was going on, that Urban Meyer had lost complete control of the program, didn't we?
Maybe just a smidgen, to be honest with you, Caleb. I didn't know that they had, obviously I didn't know that they had a future serial killer on their team. I didn't know.
But we knew there was a discipline issue because that was happening that whole season with the arrest.
I knew it, But I'd also seen one at Tennessee that Philip
But you saw what it did to Tennessee.
Agreed. But Philip Fulmer also kind of cleaned that up too. So I'm just saying I didn't know it was as bad as we've all found out.
Because when I watched that Florida Alabama SEC title game in 2009, the thing I remember, and I remember Florida having all the discipline issues that year. I was covering recruiting. Florida wasn't recruiting to the level they had done under, funny enough, Ron Zook, of all people. Like Urban Meyer benefited a lot from Ron Zook recruiting, as you know. I was following recruiting, and I watched that Florida Alabama game, and I didn't see that blowout and say, well, darn, Alabama was just significantly better. I saw that blowout and I thought, this is a trend. This wasn't a one-off game. This is Alabama is going to be Nick Saban is going to be leaps and bounds ahead of Florida for the next few years. And by the way, for those who don't know, Lane Kiffin, that was Mount Cody's year. Remember when he blocked the field goal
2009? Yes, I did, with his boob.
Yes. Florida was number 1, Tim Tebow, defending national champs. Lane Kiffin takes Tennessee to Alabama. Literally says, he starts touting Nick Saban in Alabama, and he says, no disrespect to Florida, but Alabama's who we model our future after. That's who we want to try to be like. We're trying to be more like them, not really Florida. And that was, everybody thought that's just Lane Kiffin still beefing with Urban Meyer, taking a direct shot. No, Lane Kiffin knew that Florida was about to be done.
The discipline issue? Yeah, no, I think he did. I look back at that, and I fought myself, actually. You know, people say they remember losses more than they remember wins. I remember thinking to myself, I should have asked a follow-up question. Why is Alabama the standard and not Florida? That's the follow-up question.
Oh, you were in that press conference when he said that, weren't you?
Yeah. I was in all those press conferences. Now, he wouldn't have answered it, but that would have been the question. And then you say, when asked why Alabama was the standard, comma, Kiffin said, comma, quotation marks. So that was the follow-up question that I still regret asking. But why was Alabama the standard? Because they were doing it right. We all know now that Florida wasn't.
Yes. So bringing it back to the right now, I would have thought that what ended Nick Saban, what would have been the comparable game would have been 2021, the national title game, when Georgia in a rematch just beat Alabama into submission. Dave, you saw that game a couple years ago.
That's true.
Didn't happen. I think the reason it wouldn't end Nick Saban is because Nick Saban is still doing things the right way. Whatever else you think about him, he's still doing, like, Urban Meyer was not doing things the right way. And I hate to sound like that whole, like, integrity and all of that, because no coach really has that much integrity. They're all cutthroat. Okay. Are they not? But let me
throw this at you. Nick Saban thinks he's doing it the right way, and he is ethically, but you and I pointed out that his offense is a little bit lackluster after he tried to go tempo with Lane Kiffin. I would also argue that whatever you think of Jalen Milroe, to not be ready at the beginning of the season was a really bad sign. So is Alabama walking in the door and telling a Bryce Young, hey, this is your place. We only want you. You come. I don't know. I don't cover recruiting close enough, but it sounds like to me that either Jalen Milroe showed up on campus and was a little disappointing, or Jalen Milroe was not their first choice. So all of that piles on one another. And one other factor you need to be aware of, brought to you by Tennessee Cider Company, the original hard cider of the Smoky Mountains. Use the promo code HAT to receive some free swag with your order. Available most anywhere in the U.S. That's tncidercompany.com. Promo code HAT, tncidercompany.com. You're not just losing the national championship, Caleb. You're losing your own conference. That's way worse, right?
Yes. We're talking about the heart of recruiting. That's the best recruiting area in the country. Like the circle from the Georgia, Florida, Alabama, area. Here's what's scary to Nick Saban. I'll tell you what's really scary to Nick Saban, Dave. Kirby Smart has the lock-on recruiting with Georgia. If Florida State continues to do what they've done this year with Mike Norvell, you know this. The Florida Panhandle, I think that's actually better than the South Florida with when it comes to talent. That Florida Panhandle right there, that right along the Gulf Coast from Tallahassee to Jacksonville.
I'm trying to be careful here because there's so many inner city kids in South Florida. I think there's better character, which turns out to help the ratio of really good players to guys that don't pan out.
No, that's fair.
That's as nice as way I can put it. I mean, I've been to camp on Miami's campus, and I saw 200 players that could play Division I football, literally in one camp. Probably 300. Probably about 70 did.
Well, here's the best way to say it. It's I'll say it in a better way. Public schools, inner city, are not well funded. They don't have as good a coaching. Whereas that Panhandle area, they can afford great high school coaching, can't they? And great support for the kids and things like that. And so that's where that's and not even the Panhandle to all the way into Alabama, like Mobile, that area loaded with talent. Mobile, Alabama. And what I'm bringing up is that if Florida State is good, they have a lock on the Florida Panhandle. Bobby Bowden owned the Florida Panhandle. That's how he built his whole program. And
a lot of good kids from Tampa now, and you've got IMG. But let me get back to the main topic. What is the best case scenario for Tennessee and the rest of the SEC that's tired of getting dominated by Georgia and Alabama?
So for Tennessee, the best case scenario, you are right, would be for Georgia to win in a big beatdown and hope that sends Nick Saban into retirement. I just think that's a very minor difference because I don't think it's going to happen because I just don't think it's like Florida, Alabama 2009, where everybody knew that Florida was on very thin ice. And that Florida, Alabama game was just the ice cracked and they sunk.
No, but I walked into that Georgia Dome thinking Florida was going to win because they had Tim Tebow.
Yeah, but you had watched Florida all year. They have been squeaking by in wins.
I didn't think the whole thing was falling apart. I didn't think Steve Spurrier was going to retire in 2001. I think sometimes we look at this in hindsight and we know it all, 2020. I didn't know it that night. I didn't know Urban Meyer was going to have a freak attack in the middle of the night.
I was watching. But Alabama had back-to-back #1 classes, and Tim Tebow was a senior, so he wasn't even going to be back the next year. That loss was an iceberg. That was the Titanic hitting the iceberg of Florida, wasn't it? Florida was the Titanic, and the loss was the iceberg.
But before that game, didn't you think that Florida was going to win with Tim Tebow?
I picked Alabama that game. I did. Okay. I picked Alabama the year before, to be fair, and Florida dominated them. And here was the sign. I think it was actually it was Alabama offensive lineman. Brandon Spikes had been the dirtiest player in football that year. And an Alabama offensive lineman, maybe 2 minutes into that SEC title game, purposely laid a cheap block on Brandon Spikes. And which, Dave, that happens all the time in football. Linemen will lay a cheap block if they can get away with it on a superstar defender, even if it's not anywhere near the play. And laid one on Brandon Spikes. He limped the rest of the game. And what I saw from that game was Florida, this was crazy to see, they were too soft to hang with Alabama. Didn't you think that when you watched that? They were just soft, honestly.
Yes. But I didn't know it until that second SEC championship game.